all this constant got stuff in it. Y'all know that getting rid of it.
He says that if they're delegated to the Department of Health, I would have thought they would have been.
Quality's not that good.
It's still live now. Recording. Get off of it? Yeah. What? Don't know that I'm on it. I'm not on it.
Thank you so much for being here today. This is a big day in Illinois. We can't forget to live responsibly, okay? Don't forget that. We know what to do, how to take care of ourselves. But these governor's orders are illegal. So they were ruled that today.
Representative Bailey, Mr. DeVore, Kirk Allen, and Edgar County Watchdogs, we're live streaming now all across the state and the country. What do you have as a basic comment to all of the viewers out there after today's ruling?
Well, today's ruling's about accountability. So this judge ruled, held our governor accountable. Our governor, Judge Michael McCaney today ruled essentially that Governor J.B. Pritzker violated his authority under Illinois Constitution. So that's what this is all about, and we can't let this happen anymore. We, the people, this is what this is about. We step up and we say no more. We say this is enough, and we cannot forget that in 2 years, this governor is up for re-election. And at that point in time, we, the people, must step in and hold this man accountable. So that's Illinois is desperately lacking for leadership, and it's time that we demand better. And it's time we take back this state, and we can do this.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Mr. DeVore, if you could, for the layman out there, could you explain the significance of the denial of count 1 and the granting of count 2 and 3 as to what that means to the people?
I will try. Count 1 had to do with the definition of a disaster. What does it mean to have a disaster by the wording of the Emergency Management Agency Act? That nuance probably only matters to attorneys and to people such as yourself. You can feel that something happened that's not right, but lawyers have to try to make sense of that in a courtroom again, most people will tune it out, but we have to do it. And so in count 1, I merely asked the court to find that we didn't have a disaster by definition of the Emergency Management Agency Act. The definition requires an occurrence or an event. And I argued to the judge, and again, he didn't agree, but that's fine. People can still draw their own conclusions. That the only occurrence that we had on these serial proclamations was that artificial and arbitrary end date that he placed in the first one. Again, the judge still found that at each time these new serial proclamations were issued, that there was a disaster, and he was satisfied that that was good enough. I understand what the court ruled, but I still, again, my opinion is that you might have had a disaster or a public health emergency on those serial proclamations, but that occurrence didn't cause the regeneration of those serial ones. It was that artificial end date. But again, he did not agree on that's fine. Part 2 was a little bit different, but it kind of overlaps in that what the judge said and what we asked him to find is that these serial proclamations, why there may have still been a disaster at that date, you can't create that fiction arbitrarily just to have 30 days of continued power under the Emergency Management Agency Act. He was not going to allow that definition to be utilized by the governor because I believe the judge has been clear all along that if you do that, you have executive fiat until he decides we no longer have a disaster, and the judge was not going to agree with that interpretation. He found that COVID-19 was a disaster, but to that extent, after the first 30 days was up, you can't continue to wield that executive power. The judge ruled that, and the practical effect of that today is that any executive order in effect right now that relates to COVID-19 is invalid and void and does not apply to anybody in the state of Illinois. As to count 3, regardless of this 30-day issue, the question becomes, is under the Constitution or the Emergency Management Agency Act, did the governor ever have the authority to close businesses and to restrict people's movement? That has nothing to do with the 30 days. Did it ever give him that authority? And the judge ruled today the answer was no. Regardless of the 30-day issue, you did not have authority under the Constitution of the state of Illinois or the Emergency Management Agency Act to close people's businesses or to restrict their freedoms and tell them they can leave their house when he thinks they need to leave. Judge said it doesn't go that far, you can't do that.
And do you believe that was based on the fact that the Public Health Act outlines that the Department of Public Health, has supreme authority?
I think that's a big part of it, yes, and the judge has to decide which of those acts applies. And I think the argument that was the most compelling is that, and again, the due process arguments that the judge argued and that we argued, we did not make a specific claim for due process. That's true, but it didn't matter. The judge, when he's considering, do I allow an interpretation of this act to restrict people's freedoms and their businesses, did they mean to do that, the legislature? And the judge said no. And one of the reasons is because if you're going to allow that interpretation, there is no due process in that statute. So people are just left to have no resolution or no redress in the court. And the judge is like, no, you can't do that. He made that clear. Department of Public Health Act is a supreme authority, and it has due process in it. You can go to court if you don't agree. That's what the judge ruled. Now, what's interesting that I think everybody needs to know is that there is as of right now, as we stand here today, at this moment, any executive order finding its authority in the executive orders under COVID-19, like one of the biggest ones that I hear about in my office is the limitations that have been placed upon a lot of bars and restaurants and places like that. That's gone as of right now. There is no limitation, okay? Bowling alleys, I've had a big one. They can't open. That's gone as of right now. Go open your bowling alley. The governor may want to try to ask for an emergency stay of Judge McKinney's order in the appellate court. He's got a problem. Illinois Supreme Court Rule 305 says that before you go and ask the appellate court for that, you have to ask the trial court for that. And for whatever reason, the governor's office did not ask Judge McKinney today. The order does not have in it a request for stay. You guys that have been here saw that they asked that in different cases. He didn't ask today. So in my legal opinion, he is now foreclosed from even going and asking the appellate court for a stay because he failed to ask for it here today.
In regards to the other orders, in Part C of, in relation to Count 2, the court declares any executive orders in effect after April 8, 2020 relating to COVID-19 and finding their authority under the emergency powers of Section 7 of the IEMAA, Emergency Management Act, are void ab initio. Now, void ab initio being from the beginning.
Correct.
How does that impact these school rules that they're trying to apply at this point?
You know, I wish I could say it doesn't apply, but the new rules, the joint directive that you've all been reading, the 63-page document from the Department of Health and the State Board of Education. That was state agencies.
CNN and other agencies are wanting to do a live press conference
Okay,
in just a minute.
All right, that's fine.
Black and white.
Yes, sorry about that.
Right, I can wait.
The schools. Okay, I had to get back on track. I'm sorry about that, everybody. The issue becomes. Get me back to where I was.
State agency.
In regards to the void ab initio,
Okay,
it says
so
they're
you have
all
the
void.
63-page document that was promulgated by the State Board of Education and the Department of Health. That was not promulgated by an executive order of the governor. So to that extent, we have to deal with the legality, which in my legal opinion, it has no legality. I think winning that case as it relates to the schools will be easier than this case. There's no authority for the State Board of Education to exclude children from school unless they wear a mask. It's absurd to think otherwise. The Maynard case that you guys heard about today, I'm going to file on Monday my motion for summary judgment in this court. We'll hear it 10 days after, give or take, so the 17th or 18th, somewhere like that of July. We will be back in this court arguing that the State Board of Education and the Department of Health had no authority to do that, and I've got significant Illinois Supreme Court authority that says that they can't. And if we're successful on that day, which I'm confident we will, there's not going to be any of this mask nonsense for children to have to wear to school.
Quick follow-up question. In regards to, during the hearing on the due process issue, the judge, I would say, dressed down counsel regarding pleading to the federal government that due process somehow doesn't always apply. Would you like to speak to how that particular point of the hearing today?
I read that and the judge brought it up, but I agree with the court. I know of no legal authority that says the due process rights within the Constitution, Illinois, let's use, don't say federal government, they'll want to trail off again, but can be, alleviated, flexible, etc. Again, I agree with the judge. This is America. It doesn't work that way here, right? You have due process rights. You cannot take those due process rights away. You have to be afforded them. And the judge knows that's important because if you're going to tell a citizen of this state or of this country, you got to stay at home unless you have a reason you want to leave.
But it was the governor's position that wasn't the case. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And you can only go to certain events, and I've been frustrated myself in the last few weeks because he was telling the citizens of this state, you have to social distance, et cetera, but I see numerous pictures of him across this state going to horse racing events, going to protests, completely disregarding his own rules. So, I have great respect for differences of opinion, and we can disagree as people about what's best and what's not best. But when I see someone who has an opinion that they supposedly have as a conviction, not even following it themselves, I lose a little bit of credibility for that position.
Last question in regards to the statement regarding the governor trying to compare thermonuclear war to the flu.
People were scratching in there.
And the laughter that we hear on that question is what we heard in the courtroom.
Yeah.
What was the governor's, what point was he trying to make with that comparison?
It's a fear tactic, in my opinion. I mean, the governor has controlled, I always tell people, legislature makes the laws, executive branch executes them, and the courts interpret them. That's true. But you know who the ultimate arbiter of the Constitution of this United States and state is? It's you guys. You decide. So to the extent they've been using fear since March 9th to control you, they've had some success, right? Take the issue right now of the school districts. They're telling your children you got to wear a mask. Go to your superintendent and say, you know what, my child has a right to an education. It's guaranteed in the Constitution. If he shows up without a mask, what are you going to do about it? And I can tell you I've talked to 30, 40, or 50 of them off the record, and they all say, I don't know what we're going to do because we got to educate them, right? So the people are in control. They're the ones that decide. And if enough people decide that this is not right, that's real change. Courts can help, and this court here helped significantly today. What he did do was give you all courage to know that you have to follow the law. And just because somebody says it from up above, you have to question, where does that authority come from?
And we wrote about it early on with the executive orders, and I heard you mention it today, and you're the only person I've ever heard mention it. When he declared the emergency, the first declaration dealt with what related to COVID-19?
I think it was marijuana dispensaries, if I recall.
But it had nothing to do with COVID-19, did it?
It did not.
I think that was most telling. I'm not sure that everybody understands the ramifications of that. If we have an emergency, why was dope put ahead of everything else?
That's awesome.
Fair question, sir.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much,
Congratulations
guys.
on your win.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to jump over here with them though. I'm going to be around.
I have one question. Go ahead. What does this do with unemployment?
Hey.
Hey, you.
Nice queens in here, please. All right. Gentlemen, to start off, obviously this was a big victory for you, Representative. I just want to hear from you before I go to your story here. What do you think of today's result?
Well, this is a victory for freedom. This is a victory for the people of Illinois. This is what we stand for as a country. This is it. I mean, to sit here and to let one person, as we're experiencing across our country, tell us what to do, and we've heard the words comply. You know, that's ridiculous. There's no place for that in this country. So I simply asked a question. Had to have the help of attorney to ask that question. Simply ask a question. Is this right? Because I don't think it is. So we discovered today that my question was founded, and this indeed is not right. So that's what this is all about.
And with that, one thing that people may notice as well is that you've obviously gone a hard journey to get to this point. Once again, they mentioned it today. This initially started with the stay-at-home order. We're well past that, but as you argued, we're at the point now where it is the Restore Illinois. That is out the door now, according to what you said today, right?
Correct.
So for some that may be worried that we're going to turn into an Arizona, to a Florida that has spiking of cases, what do you have to say to those families today?
I'd say we're still dealing with what the truth is with facts and data. What's the truth? We've got hospitals throughout the state literally going broke. We've got the Red Cross when they're coming in taking one of their blood drives. They're doing COVID tests. You know, how many positives are stacking on top of each other. So we live, this is the way we live. We're smart, we're Americans. We live responsibly. That's what we've been doing, and that's certainly what we've been doing down here in Southern Illinois, because there's no sign of what you suggest. So again, as some of our conversation included, is a simple fact that county by county, the health departments can be involved and work with some of this stuff. But no, to sit here and govern a one rule, one size fits all, you must do this. Today was a big day, not just for Illinois, but for every American in this country, because we are losing our freedoms.
That's right. For those that don't get a copy of the order today, can you explain for us here the counts 2 and 3, the ones that you won today?
Sure. Count 2 was a question of whether or not the Emergency Management Agency Act of the state of Illinois granted the emergency powers under Section 7 to the executive branch in excess of 30 days. The governor's office argued that he could place within his disaster proclamations, of which there's been several now, maybe a half a dozen, an arbitrary 30-day end date, which is not required by the law. He merely placed that in there, which causes that emergency disaster proclamation to expire on its own terms, but again, I would suggest artificially. And each time that he would do that, he would then take the position that the emergency powers granted him, whatever those may be, were re-energized and would continue for another 30 days, arguably into perpetuity, until he is satisfied himself that he has abated a public health emergency under these circumstances. We argued that to the court that the judge should not interpret the Emergency Management Agency Act in such a fashion to allow that fiction, which is created solely by placing this arbitrary 30-day end date into it, to be the interpretation of the act to allow the governor to do that. We asked the court to find that fiction not be allowed, and that the 30-day limitation be to start upon the issuance of the first proclamation, but after that 30 days, the governor can't continue to bootstrap on over and over. The judge agreed with us to that extent, and the judge ruled clearly that any executive order that relates to COVID-19 of his 40-something that he's entered, whatever ones find their authority in the COVID-19 disaster, are void ab initio, which means they never existed as of April 9th, since that time forward. So as we stand here today, any executive order out there, one of them that comes to mind with me is one of the most recent that limits the occupancy that people can have in their businesses. That's gone as we stand here right now.
As of today.
As of right now, as we stand here. That was the essence of count 2. Count 3 took that another step and said, regardless of the 30-day issue, what is the extent of the power the governor has over restricting the movement of our citizens or to close businesses, affect business, regulations? We argued that the Constitution nor the Emergency Management Agency Act gives the governor any authority over those two particular issues, and that the authority of those issues has been delegated to the Department of Health by the legislative branch of government. The judge agreed with us. So the judge found that the governor, under no set of facts, could close a business, nor could he restrict your freedoms and make you stay at home. The judge found that today, and so that, again, that ruling means that all of those efforts that the governor took were invalid and beyond his authority.
One of the strongest arguments you've had throughout this whole thing is that no one man could rule the state through these executive orders. You kept coming back to this one man in Judge McCain with his decisions. And that was brought up because they showed many different court cases that were dealt with that sided with the governor. To those that are, I'm just playing devil's advocate, to those that are saying that you came to this man, Judge McCain, because he favors the representative. He's against the stay-at-home order. He's against the governor no matter what.
I can respond to that. I'd ask you first and foremost, where did the first case start? It started down here. And so to say that we artificially did that is absurd. My client lives in this county. We came here and filed this in April before any of those other rulings were even issued. Okay? Those other rulings that the governor tries to throw around were not rulings on the merits. Those were temporary restraining order rulings where courts don't get to consider the evidence and the facts, etc. And again, they only ruled, again, not on the merits, that the interpretation of the Section 7 could allow for the continuation of proclamations. Again, their arguments, without getting into it, were a little bit different than ours. But nonetheless, it's not uncommon that a judge can rule one way and the other does the other way. It happens every day in this state. As to issue 3, I would point out to you that none of those other cases up north dealt with issue 3. What was the extent of the governor's power regardless of the 30-day issue? So that was new for us, and Judge ruled on it here today.
You mentioned a little bit earlier that specifically it was odd that your opponent, the Illinois Attorney General's office, didn't ask for a stay before we finished up today. It
Correct.
wasn't on that final document.
Right.
And now they're going to look to see the options that they have moving forward. An appeal isn't happening today. So what does that mean for Illinoisans?
Well, they can still appeal if they want to, and that appeal will take time as it goes through the appellate court. I can't speak to why the governor's office did not request a stay of this particular order. Whether it would have been granted or denied, we don't know. But Illinois Supreme Court Rule 305 says that the governor was required to ask for that, and he didn't. So to the extent he can try and go get an emergency stay, it's been foreclosed, in my opinion. What that means is that until a reviewing court otherwise, sometime down the road, month, 2, 3, or 4, renders a ruling, the court's order here today stands, which means there is no restrictions by the governor. I would like to speak to what you asked to Mr. Bailey about what does that mean for the people of the state of Illinois. What it means is what it's always meant, is that we have a legislative branch of government, right? We have a Department of Health. Never once have we ever stood here and said, why is what our legislative branch, the people's voice, have they done something that we don't agree with? No, they haven't done anything, and to that extent I can't speak to why they haven't. But the issue is that the governor, as the executive, can't rule this state by executive fiat. I mean, we have a separation of powers that 250 years ago said we don't operate that way. Whether the governor has been, wise in his choices or not wise, I'm not even here to talk about. What I'm saying is the governor, one man alone, does not get a rule over 13 million people. We have a people's voice, it's the legislature. They can start making rules or laws if they think they need to, and we can argue about them if we think they're unconstitutional. Department of Health in every county can start working and trying to do what they think they need to do, and whether they exceed their authority, we can talk about that too. That's where we go from here with the legislature and these administrative agencies doing what they think they need to do county by county. But having the governor sit there and try to a one-size-fits-all doesn't work. It doesn't work in any fashion. It's not going to work in their school case that we're going to get to in a couple weeks, and it didn't work here.
Now, your defense brought up that, hey, this COVID-19 crisis is serious. And that there were some laughs here and there, and that's open in an open courtroom. There's people that are there. Do you agree that this is a serious issue? Obviously, they mentioned the number of people that have died. Sure, the survival rate, the judge brought that up. That's always mentioned. And they compare it to other diseases, other types of viruses. Do you think this is a serious issue? Have you seen the rest of the country right now?
Well, again, let's keep in mind we're talking about Illinois. I'm not here to speak about the rest of the country. And I'm not a medical professional. I'm an attorney. And to that extent, I have to rely on the law and the rules and the procedures that are in place. If we as a country or as a state, let's talk again, Illinois, if we're going to allow executive fiat to rule under an emergency situation, we have nothing. What we have is a governor that we had for governors when kings used to rule the land, and not, the consent of the people. The people, we consent to how things get ruled upon,
Amen.
right? And so if somebody can show me where the people of this state consented that under an emergency like COVID-19, the executive branch gets to tell them what to do without any due process, I'd like to read it. And I haven't seen it yet. And it disappoints me that the person who's supposed to be representing the people of this state, you guys know who that is? That's the Attorney General. He represents the people of this state. And all he's done since we've been doing this is fighting 13 million people that he's supposed to have a duty to protect. That's what's disappointing to me. So to that extent, I rely upon the systems of government that are in place.
They'll argue that they're here for public health, though. And in the fact that, let's say it's a few weeks from now, people, this may be a thing where everybody's wide open. As you mentioned, it's wide open today. People can go into stores, they can do whatever they want. People can go into restaurants now. What if we see that spike? Isn't that on your hands?
No, it's not on my hands.
Because you think that people are going to abide by these, they're going to be safe by themselves.
I'm saying people have a choice. And if what you're suggesting to me, because of that risk that you're saying exists, that we need to allow executive fiat tantamount to kingsmanship rule this country, sir, I'll take my chances with the disease, because there will be another COVID-19 down the road. And if every time we have a risk as people that we have to deal with, if the result is we run to one man to make those answers, I feel sorry for this state and this country.
States that were already wide open are now requiring masks all across the state. Texas, of all the places, this is a you want to have it wide open just like Texas. And look what they did today.
Have you ever read any of the Illinois Supreme Court? Do you respect the law? The law says that you cannot promulgate health regulations which merely have a tendency to prevent the spread of a disease. Those aren't my rules, sir. That's the Illinois Supreme Court. Until they change their mind and say that health regulations can be promulgated just to try to prevent COVID, I'm going to stand here as an attorney representing people in this state saying you can't do it.
Amen.
And if it needs to be done, the legislative branch can come out of hiding and they can do something. No disrespect, Mr.
Very
Bailey.
nice.
And if they want to come out and pass a law, then we'll talk about it. But until then, I, as an attorney representing my client, will rely upon the rule of law. Because if we don't have it, we don't have anything. And I'm not going to abandon the rule of law to take on risk that something may happen health-wise. If we're going to do that, sir, this state is gone and this country is gone. And I'm not going to sit by and let that happen.
You've mentioned to me previously, this will be the last one. You've mentioned to me previously that if this was IDPH, each of the individual public health departments, just giving the guidance, making sure, hey, we want to make sure each individual community is doing well. Obviously, we know there's one county in the state right now that has no cases. Others are hotspots, like Chicago, St. Clair County. Are you okay if it were to go to that angle of things, where it's up to each individual public health department?
I think each individual health department has the authority that they've been granted by the legislative branch of government. They can read what their authority is. And if those local departments of health want to start engaging in rules, regulations, etc., to the extent they're granted by the legislature to protect people, if that's not sufficient, you know what? The legislative branch can try to give them more authority. And then we can talk about that. But as we sit here today, they have the ability to protect people, and I'm asking them to do it.
And you're willing to give them that authority as a lawmaker as well?
No. Tell me that. Yeah, they've got what they need.
Right. Would you be willing to give them more authority? Let's say we
No,
have a
because
special
we
session.
don't understand any facts in the data. So we see this increase in COVID. What is that? What does that mean? What does that look like? No one has a clue, because the governor himself was never told us what models he's using after he's changed multiple times. He's never told us, shared with us the facts, the data. We've had to pry that out of a doctor in Zike over these last several months, and we still haven't got answers. So no, something is amiss here, and it's time to say no more.
Rep Bailey,
Yes.
after all of that, how does this feel today?
It feels awesome because this is freedom. He explains it so perfectly well that we don't allow one person, Governor J.B. Pritzker, that has never in his life been here, has no idea what this is like in Chicago, Illinois. He has no idea. When you sit here and look at these maps that he put together, they make no sense that Wayne County would be treated the same as Madison County. It's disastrous. So that alone suggests to me that somebody does not know what they are doing and that they desire totalitarian rule. That's what we are experiencing, and it's time to say no more.
They knew what they were doing, and that's why they did it that way.
There's an election.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. I didn't mean to get in your way. So you pick me up.
Is that good? Okay. Thank you.